Okay, this Sunday at A Place to Talk, we're going to be asking the question, was Jesus a heartless monster? Matthew 8:18 through 22. Here's the text we're looking at. Let's read it. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "The foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go bury my father." Jesus told him, "Follow me, let the dead bury their own dead." He's like, I don't care if your dad died, let's go. Interesting. Does that make Jesus a heartless father, a heartless monster? Or is there something else going on here? I'm not sure. Let's ask the question. First of all, let's talk about the question that has been asked for a long time. Was Jesus a homeless, migrant kind of person, or did he own a home in Capernaum? Okay, so we don't know. It's quite possible. And Jesus says, no, it seems, right? I mean, there's three different ways to look at this. No gospel says specifically that Jesus owned a house. Matthew 8:14 names the house nearby as Peter's. And Mark 2:1 says at home in the house does not prove ownership. Okay, so there's a lot of different debate. There's three different ways that people look at this. Some people say that he stayed in Capernaum regularly. He must have had a home there because of Matthew 9:1 and Matthew 4:13 and Mark 2:1. Some people seem to think that Jesus had just spent time in Capernaum, but he didn't own anything there. He didn't live there. Jesus says he had no place to lay his head. Well, here's the real question. Does it matter if Jesus had a home? Or is Matthew's issue whether comfort and security go with discipleship? That's really the question. We'll talk about that this Sunday at A Place to Talk. Does it matter if Jesus owned a home? Maybe it does. Homeless, unhomed. We might talk about that terminology that people sometimes are making a big question about. Should you call somebody homeless, or should you call them unhomed, or should you not even talk about, should maybe your home and your residence not be the subject of people's, it should not be what you talk about, what you think about when you think about people. All right, let's talk about, was Jesus a heartless monster? There's three honest ways to read this shocking thing that he says. One thing is just the blunt reading. Jesus really is making a shocking demand, and he's saying that the kingdom it's urgent enough to interrupt even sacred duties, right? Like burying your dad. Another way to read this is maybe Jesus is kind of harsh with this guy because his dad's not even dead yet, right? That's one of the thoughts, is that maybe this guy is just saying, all right, my dad's 70, or he's at retirement age. Let me do this years in the future after my dad has died and I've buried him, and then I'll think about following you. That's a very delayed kind of way to look at this. And then another one is maybe Jesus is contrasting the two different guys. One says, I'll follow you anywhere. He's got this crazy enthusiasm. And the other one says, well, let me do this other thing first. And Jesus is kind of making the contrast there. Is Jesus denying grief or confronting the phrase, let me first? Which is it? What's going on here? Why does Jesus seem to discourage the man who says, I'll follow you anywhere? Oh, by the way, this is A Place to Talk. This is the question video. You say, Josh, it sounds like you're asking a lot of questions and not giving any answers. Yep, that's right. That's all we do. These videos are just kind of introducing you to the things that we'll talk about. I believe that these letters, these stories, these writings, especially some of Paul's letters and letters in this time, were read. They were digested. They were passed around, and people read them openly and discussed them back in the day, right? And these texts, the Gospels and all the letters from the Scripture, they all just kind of drove conversation. And that's what we're doing is I'm giving you the questions that will drive our conversation on Sunday. You say, Josh, these videos aren't very good. They're just questions. Right. The meat of this, what a place to talk is it's a place where we talk. It's the conversation that matters. It's not this video with these questions. These questions are just kind of introducing what we'll actually talk about this coming Sunday at A Place to Talk. Why does Jesus, oh, by the way, today is, August the 18th, 19th, something like that. And the conversation will take place this coming Sunday. Why does Jesus seem to discourage the man who says, I'll follow you while refusing to give the other man time to bury his father? What does that tell us about the difference between enthusiasm, excuses, and actual discipleship? I'll follow you anywhere. What if the problem is not sincerity, but enthusiasm without the ability to follow through? What if later eventually becomes the real answer? I always say, let's do something. This is me. I always say, let's do something, even if it's wrong. What are your thoughts about action, even if it isn't perfect? All right, and maybe Jesus is trying to show us here the beautiful middle, not impulsive, not avoidant, honest, steady action with open eyes and costs counted. So there's 3 different places we're going to look at this. What if Jesus is confronting both extremes, shallow enthusiasm and endless delay, and calling us to a costly, honest middle? All right, that's what we'll talk about this Sunday at Place to Talk. Hope you can be a part.